Margaret Doyle never imagined that her quiet acts of compassion would one day return to her. For 7 years, she provided meals to a homeless black boy behind the diner, until her envious manager set her up and had her dismissed. Penniless and overlooked, she handed the boy one final package of food with her address slipped inside, hoping he would make it. A 10-year silence ensued, until one fall evening, a dark SUV arrived at her dilapidated home. When the man exited the vehicle, she stood motionless. The young man she had once aided had come back, and his next revelation would transform everything. The eatery was perpetually filled with the scent of scorched coffee and frying bacon each morning. Aged booths lined the walls, their red vinyl splitting from decades of service, while the murmur of talk blended with the sound of clattering dishes. For the majority, it was merely a spot for an inexpensive morning meal. However, for Margaret Doyle, a 60-year-old server with gray-streaked hair tied in a bun, the diner constituted her entire universe. She operated with calm efficiency, replenishing mugs, carrying trays, and offering weary grins even when her legs were sore. Most patrons hardly acknowledged her, except when their meals were delayed. Yet, Margaret maintained a hidden routine after her duties concluded, one unknown to the usual customers. When each day ended, she would exit through the rear door, holding a modest paper sack. Occasionally, it contained remaining food, other times items she had purchased with her own tip money. She proceeded along the narrow passage, her footsteps scraping the pavement, until she arrived near the garbage container where a boy consistently waited. He appeared no older than 8 during their initial encounter. His deep brown skin and large eyes, heavy with need, contrasted with his threadbare clothing, inadequate for the chill. He never requested anything. He never pleaded. He simply stood, shifting his weight, his arms wrapped tightly as if shielding himself from the world. Initially, she paused, but when she offered him a wrapped sandwich, he observed her with an expression surpassing thankfulness. It was astonishment, as if compassion was more foreign to him than starvation. Thus, their pattern started. Day after day, year after year, Margaret brought him nourishment. She avoided intrusive questions. She didn't require his history. She simply provided him with a piece of pie when available, soup during cold spells, a milk carton when her funds allowed. Other employees began to take note. "You're throwing good food on some vagrant," one cook murmured, disapproving. Another server commented under their breath, "You'll be sorry." Those kids never recall who assisted them. Margaret acted as though she didn't hear, but the remarks affected her like minor wounds, painful before she suppressed them. Nevertheless, she continued feeding him. She began including napkins, with brief messages, a drawn smile, a wish to stay warm, sometimes just his name, which he had once softly shared and she never voiced to others. It was their secret. During storms, she transported bread protected in her coat, sheltering it from the rain. On sweltering summer nights, she froze water bottles so he could have something cool. When her hands shook from arthritis, she still prepared that paper bag and walked the alley as if the custom itself sustained her. By the 7th year, the boy had gained height, his structure becoming more filled, but his eyes still held the same gravity. He would acknowledge her silently, occasionally producing a partial smile. Conversations were scarce. The quiet between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was about endurance. And within that silence, she truly perceived him not as a homeless black child, not as another neglected youth, but as a person of significance, even if nobody else recognized it. Margaret didn't realize it then, but each food package was sowing a seed. While others passed by the boy daily, without a second look, she halted. She paid attention. She showed compassion. The murmurs at the diner intensified. Some ridiculed her generosity. Others expressed skepticism. 7 years. You think you're some kind of saint, they jested privately. But Margaret remained indifferent. She had long understood that the most modest deeds, performed consistently, were the most powerful prayers. So she persisted in exiting through that rear door, the paper bag warm in her grasp, never anticipating the profound impact it would eventually have. The diner's rear office carried the odor of old cigarettes and strong cologne. Behind the desk was Mr. Clayton, the manager, with a dense mustache, hair overly styled with gel, and a smile that never reached his eyes. He observed people as though they were disposable components, not individuals. Clayton was aware of everything. Lately, he had been watching Margaret, not her fatigue or her soreness, but her habit of carrying bags after hours, too frequently, too discreetly. He started making casual comments when alone. Strange how food keeps vanishing after shifts, he remarked one evening, his stare intensifying. Margaret busied herself with stacking dishes, but his words lingered. The co-workers' whispers didn't help. Maybe she's taking pies, a cook joked in the kitchen. No, another server said quietly. She's still feeding that alley kid. I saw her, the first laughed. Well, the boss won't approve. If she's caught wasting stock, that's like stealing. Margaret overheard. Her grip on the coffee pot tightened, but she remained silent. Then, one Friday night, the situation escalated. The cash register was short $40. Clayton assembled the staff, moving before them like a predator ready to attack. His tone was controlled, too controlled. Someone's been taking money, and I don't need to guess who. Glances moved toward Margaret. Her stomach sank. Clayton pointed. You've been walking out with bags every night. Everyone's witnessed it. Don't act innocent. Her chest constricted. Her voice quivered as she attempted to clarify. That's food, not cash. I've never taken from the register. But Clayton interrupted with a scornful look. You think the owner cares about your sad tale? You're finished here. Quiet filled the diner. A silence more piercing than words. A young busboy whispered near the entrance. She's been here longer than any of us. They can't just dismiss her like that. The other shrugged. They just did. Clayton always wanted her gone. Margaret stood immobilized, the room whirling. She wanted to yell, to resist, to request evidence. But years of silence, years of accepting indignity, kept her mute. And so she left. That night, her steps along the alley were weightier than ever. The boy was waiting, his shoulders bent against the cold. He looked at her, anticipating the usual bag. Her hands shook as she passed it to him. Inside was more than a meal. She had inserted a folded napkin, the ink smeared where her tears had fallen. I don't work here anymore. They accused me of things I didn't do, but if you ever need help, this is where I live. She included her address, her writing unsteady. The boy accepted the bag, staring at her longer than normal, his lips slightly open as if to speak, but no sound emerged. He simply nodded, pressed the bag to his chest, and vanished into the darkness. Margaret remained in the alley long after he had gone, a cold piercing her coat, her spirit empty. She possessed nothing now. No employment, no stability, no assurance. Only the slender hope that the boy might someday recall the address. But as weeks became months and months became years, no one came to her door. And Margaret discovered the harshest aspect of kindness. Sometimes you offer everything, and it disappears into silence. Winters were the hardest, the kind that penetrate wool and chill the bone. Margaret learned to wear double socks, a cardigan beneath her coat, a scarf secured to block the wind. Mornings smelled of menthol and cleaning agents. She took on part-time cleaning work, scrubbing the lives of others to afford her own. She would kneel to clean baseboards, pause to flex her aching hands, then continue. Her house remained small and orderly, a fading blue with a porch that groaned like an old companion. On the refrigerator, crooked under a pie-shaped magnet, was a folded napkin bearing her slanted handwriting. She didn't require the reminder. She kept it regardless, a personal vow that if a knock ever came, she would answer. Neighbors came and went, like changing seasons. New faces, new vehicles, new sounds. Some mornings, teenagers in hoodies would lean against a fence, exchanging whispers. "Yo, that's Miss Margaret," one once said, tilting his head toward her. The old lady with the tote bag. She used to feed some kid behind the diner every day. Crazy, right? Nah, people forget. Bet the kid did, too. Their voices faded as she passed. She raised a hand and continued walking. She continued to notice small details. A stray cat that avoided touch, the bus driver humming off-key, a newspaper headline about a young entrepreneur securing millions, names and figures that passed like rain on glass. She didn't read business sections. Coupons were more practical. At night, she prepared weak tea, listened to the radiator hiss, and watched headlights paint soft, moving shapes on the ceiling. On Sundays, she volunteered at a church pantry, arranging cans into neat stacks. The pastor's wife occasionally tried to give her money. Margaret would smile, return the cash, and gesture toward a mother managing twins. Her week seems tougher than mine. Then she would straighten labels, align edges, and breathe deeply when the door finally closed. Every winter, she knitted one scarf, the same design, slow and constant, like counting days. She stored them in a drawer she never opened. Spring always arrived, but she knitted anyway. Routine can be a form of prayer. Some months were difficult. The electricity bill loomed like a persistent concern. She took an additional shift, cleaning a barber shop after hours. The owner whistled, handed her a soda. "What's up, Em? You good?" "I'm all right," she'd reply, polishing a surface until it gleamed. "I'm here." Gossip spread faster than truth. At the convenience store, two women by the lottery stand shared quiet remarks behind their hands. "She's still by herself." Hey, heard she lost that diner job over something shady." A pause, sad. "Some folks give until nothing remains. Then what?" Margaret pretended to examine tomatoes, testing for ripeness, pretending the whispers didn't affect her. They did. She just knew how to bear weight quietly. Years passed like sunsets low, if watched, gone in a blink. The boy's face became less distinct, but his eyes remained vivid in her memory, constant and bright. Sometimes, when a tall teenager crossed the street and held a door for her, a warmth rose in her chest, almost a laugh. "Look at you, look how you endured." Then the door shut. The day continued. On a humid July night, sleep was elusive. The air was dense. The fan wobbled with a slight tick. Margaret sat on the edge of her bed, pressed her knuckles, and listened to the neighborhood's rhythms. Music from a few houses away, a couple arguing softly, then quieter, a distant siren. She stood, moved to the kitchen, poured water, and leaned on the counter. The laminate was cool on her arms. Her breathing slowed. Autumn returned, leaves changed like turning pages and fell. She gathered small piles, bagged them, paused to stretch her tight back. Across the street, a new couple moved in, carrying plants, artwork, and a bicycle with a squeaky wheel. The man waved. "Morning," she replied, a slight smile touching her lips. That week, the barber mentioned an incredible story about a tech entrepreneur who overcame a difficult childhood and was now constructing schools. Names circulated through the shop quickly, with excitement. Margaret cleaned mirrors, half listening, letting the words pass. Schools, children, good. She filed the thought away with the others. The room was filled with gentle, faint sounds, the clock's tick, the fan's hum, the cup's light tap as she set it down. She released a long, slow breath. Late afternoon faded into blue. Gravel crackled nearby, a sound more substantial than the usual flow, a heavier engine, steady, deliberate. At first, she didn't move. Engines were part of her street's normal noise. Still, her hand moved to the curtain. She pinched the fabric enough to lift it. Headlights swept across the porch rail, bright and clear. A dark SUV came into view and stopped at the curb, its hood mirroring the faint sky, the motor purring low and even like a held breath. Margaret's fingers tightened on the curtain's edge. She felt her pulse in her wrist, measurable, calm, not alarmed, simply aware. She set the scarf on the table, smoothed it once with her palms, and stood. The radiator clicked and fell silent. A man emerged, tall, wearing a sharp suit, the kind seen only in magazines left on barbershop tables. The door closed with a solid, expensive thud. He stood still for a moment, examining the house as if committing it to memory. His eyes, steady, deep, and undeniably familiar, finally met hers. Margaret held on to the doorframe, her knees weakening. Where do I know those eyes? He approached, not hurriedly, not hesitantly, but with purpose, as if bearing years of weight. When he reached the porch, he stopped at a respectful distance. Then he spoke, his voice low, warm, layered with something she hadn't heard in a decade. "You don't remember me, do you?" Margaret blinked, her lips parting. The silver of his watch caught the dimming light. She shook her head gently. I can't place you." He smiled, and for a fleeting moment, she saw him, not the man, but the boy. The same wide eyes she'd watched grow hungrier each year. The same quiet nods at the alley's edge. "I'm the kid from behind the diner," he said. "The one you fed every day for 7 years." The world seemed to tilt. Margaret steadied herself on the frame, her breath caught in her chest. The alley, the paper bags, the napkins, the final note with her address. The boy. Her eyes welled up. The memory flooded back with a sharpness that was almost painful. "Oh my God," she whispered. He nodded, his gaze gentle. "That note you gave me, I kept it. I didn't come then. I couldn't. I was barely surviving. But I promised myself, if I ever made it out, I'd find you." Her throat burned with tears she hadn't released in years. She weakly gestured toward the door. "Come in, please, come in." Margaret's hands trembled as she covered her mouth. She whispered, "All I ever wanted was for you to eat, to be okay." He exhaled steadily. "You did more than that. You gave me dignity when the world took it away." The following weeks passed like sequences from a dream. He arranged a new home for Herbright, filled with light, without peeling paint or a creaking porch. He established a business in her name, one that would ensure her financial security for life. But the greatest surprise was yet to come. He founded an orphanage, brick by brick, constructed in her honor. Above the entrance, engraved in clean stone, were the words, "The Doyle Home for Children." Reporters crowded the opening, cameras flashing as he stood at the podium. Margaret, in a simple navy dress, sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes brimming as he gestured toward her. "If not for her," he declared, his voice strong enough to hush the crowd, "I wouldn't be here today. She fed me when the world wouldn't. She believed I mattered when no one else did. She didn't look at my skin. She didn't ask questions. She just cared. And that gave me the strength." A wave of astonishment moved through the audience. Heads turned toward Margaret, some applauding, others wiping their eyes. She felt warmth rise to her cheeks. Her hands shook, but this time not from fatigue, from something deeper, more profound, being truly seen. When the event concluded, children from the orphanage, bright-eyed, energetic, and full of life, ran to her, embracing her legs, tugging at her sleeves. She laughed, the sound surprising even her. For the first time in years, Margaret's heart felt complete, not from wealth, not from acclaim, but from the quiet certainty that what she had given in silence had returned in ways she never could have imagined. And so, the food she carried in paper bags became more than mere sustenance. They became seeds, seeds that grew into a man, a legacy, and a sanctuary for countless others. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness outlast the darkest years. Because when Margaret fed a forgotten boy, she wasn't just alleviating hunger, she was nurturing hope. What would you have done if you were Margaret? Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can build a legacy. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that prove kindness always finds its way back.